Hello, story lovers! Tonight, we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe. Share it with someone who loves a powerful love story. And tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. Asterisk, the throne room of Winfort Castle smelled of old stone and dying roses. Princess Eleanor stood at the altar, her silk gown heavy against her skin, waiting for a man she had never met. The stained glass filtered afternoon light into fractured colors across the marble floor. She felt like she was drowning in them. This marriage was supposed to save her kingdom, a strategic alliance, nothing more. But the rumors had reached even Venner. Prince Edward, they said, never showed his face in public. Always masked. Always hidden. Some claimed he was disfigured from battle. Others whispered darker things about madness that ran in the royal bloodline. About a prince who could not be trusted with his own reflection. Eleanor had spent 26 years learning to read people through what they refused to say. She needed that skill now more than ever. The great doors opened with a sound like thunder. He entered alone. No procession, no fanfare. Just a man in black and silver, his face covered by an ornate silver mask that revealed nothing but his eyes. They were storm gray, and they found her immediately across the vast hall. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Not from fear, from recognition of something she could not name. Prince Edward walked toward her with deliberate steps, each one measured and controlled. The candlelight caught the edges of his mask, making shadows dance across the metal. When he reached the altar, he stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell cedar and rain on him. Princess Eleanor. His voice was low, rougher than she expected. I apologize for the mystery. Mystery is often more honest than revelation, Your Highness. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. We all wear masks. Yours is simply more visible. Something shifted in those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something more dangerous. The Archbishop cleared his throat, uncomfortable with their exchange. Shall we begin? The ceremony proceeded in Latin and Old Kingdom tongue, words Eleanor barely heard. She was too focused on the prince beside her, on the tension in his shoulders. On the way, his gloved hands clenched and released at his sides. This was a man at war with himself. When the final moment came, the Archbishop turned to Edward with visible reluctance. Your Highness, tradition demands that you reveal your face to your bride and to the kingdom. The mask must be removed. The room went silent. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 100 watching eyes. Edward turned to face her fully. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and Eleanor saw something raw and wounded in his expression. Then his hands moved to the clasps at the back of his mask. Wait. Eleanor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Every head turned toward her. The Archbishop looked scandalized. But Eleanor only looked at Edward. If my husband wishes to keep his mask, he may keep it. She spoke loud enough for the entire hall to hear. I do not need to see his face to know his worth. Edward froze, his hands still at the clasps. Eleanor, you will remove it when you choose to, if you choose to. She held his gaze steadily, not because tradition demands it. For 5 full heartbeats, no one moved. Then Edward's hands dropped from the mask. He took Eleanor's hand instead, his grip almost painful in its intensity. Continue the ceremony, he said to the Archbishop, his voice carrying an edge of command that silenced all protest. The Archbishop stammered through the final words. Rings were exchanged. Vows were spoken. And when Edward lifted Eleanor's hand to his masked lips, she felt the cold metal press against her knuckles and wondered what she had just bound herself to as they walked down the aisle together. Eleanor heard the whispers start like wildfire, but she did not care, because Prince Edward had leaned close enough for only her to hear, and his words made her blood run cold. You should have let them see. You should have run while you had the chance. Eleanor looked up at him, at the mask that revealed nothing and hid everything. I do not run from things that frighten me, Your Highness. I walked directly toward them. His laugh was bitter and beautiful. Then you are either very brave or very foolish, princess. We will discover which soon enough. They emerged from the castle into the courtyard, where a carriage waited. Edward handed her inside without ceremony, then climbed in after her. The door closed, shutting them into shadows and silence, as the carriage lurched forward, carrying them toward whatever future awaited. Edward finally spoke again. There are things about me you need to know, Eleanor. Things that will make you wish you had made them remove this mask. He touched the silver covering his face. Things that will make you understand why I can never take it off. Eleanor settled back against the velvet seat, her wedding gown rustling in the darkness. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Then tell me, she said quietly. Tell me everything. Edward turned to look at her, and in his gray eyes, she saw a hurricane building. Not here. Not yet, but soon. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his grip desperate. When I do, Eleanor, you will have a choice to make, and I pray to whatever gods are listening that you choose wisely. The carriage rolled on through the gathering storm, carrying two strangers bound by vows neither fully understood, toward a truth that would shatter everything. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands. At the wedding ring, that felt like a shackle and a lifeline all at once. She had thought she was saving her kingdom by accepting this marriage. She was beginning to realize she might have doomed them both. The castle Edward brought her to was not Windford. It was smaller, older, perched on a cliff overlooking an endless black ocean. The stones were dark gray and slick with sea spray, and the windows were narrow like watching eyes. This is Shadowkeep, Edward said, as he helped her from the carriage. The rain had started, cold and relentless. My true home. The place where I can be what I am. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter. And what are you, husband? He did not answer. Instead, he led her through corridors lit by torches that seemed to eat the light rather than give it. Servants bowed as they passed, but Eleanor noticed none would meet Edward's eyes. They looked at his boots, at the walls, at anything but the masked prince who walked among them like a ghost. Finally, Edward stopped before a heavy wooden door. He unlocked it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck, then gestured for Eleanor to enter. The room beyond was sparse. A bed, a desk covered in papers, a fireplace where flames crackled and hissed, and on every wall mirrors, dozens of them, reflecting the fire and the rain-streaked windows and Edward's masked figure over and over into infinity. Close the door, Edward said softly. Eleanor did. When she turned back, Edward was standing in the center of the room, his hands at the clasps of his mask. This time, he did not stop. The mask came away slowly. Eleanor held her breath, preparing herself for scars, for deformity, for whatever horror had kept him hidden. But when the silver fell away, she saw only a face. A beautiful face, sharp-featured and pale, with a mouth made for cruelty or kindness in equal measure. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, thin as a whisper, but nothing that warranted hiding. I don't understand, Eleanor whispered. Edward set the mask on the desk with careful precision. When he looked at her again, his expression was hollow. Of course you don't. This is not the curse. He moved to the window, bracing his hands against the frame. Rain hammered the glass. When I was 16, my father took me to war. He wanted to make me a warrior, a king who could lead armies. And I was good at it, Eleanor. Too good. His voice dropped lower. I killed 27 men in my first battle. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because something inside me woke up that day, something dark and hungry, and it has never gone back to sleep. Eleanor's heart began to race. Edward. I wear the mask because, if I do not, if people see my face, they see the truth. He turned to face her, and his eyes were wild. They see that I enjoy it. The violence. The control. The power of taking a life. My father saw it too before he died. He made me promise to never remove the mask in public, to never let the kingdom see what their prince truly is. The rain grew louder, matching the thunder of Eleanor's pulse. You think you are a monster? I know I am. Edward's laugh was broken. The mask is not to hide deformity, Eleanor. It is to hide the truth. I am not fit to rule. I am not fit to be anyone's husband. I am a weapon, and weapons do not love. They only destroy. Eleanor stood very still, processing every word. Then she walked toward him, her steps deliberate, until she stood close enough to see the fear behind his defiance. "You are wrong," she said quietly. "You do not know me." "No, but I know monsters." Eleanor reached up and touched the scar on his cheek, and Edward flinched like she had struck him. "And you are not one. A monster would not hate himself for what he is. A monster would not cage himself to protect others. Alana, you do not understand the things I have done. Then tell me." She held his gaze. "Tell me the worst of it." Edward's jaw clenched. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then words began to spill out like poison, like confession, like prayer. He told her about the battles where he had lost himself in blood, about the enemy soldier who had surrendered, and how Edward had killed him anyway because the darkness inside demanded it, about the nights he woke up wanting violence, craving it like hunger, about the mask that had become both prison and protection. Eleanor listened to all of it, her hands still resting against his face, feeling the tremor in his jaw as he spoke. When he finally fell silent, rain streaming down the windows behind them, Eleanor spoke softly. "I was sent here to save my kingdom from a curse." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held ancient pain. "The curse was me, Edward. On the day I was born, every flower in Venner's royal garden died. Every single one withered to ash in an instant. The court seers said I carried death in my shadow, that wherever I went, life would flee." Edward's eyes widened. "That is superstition." "Is it?" Eleanor dropped her hand. "My mother died in childbirth. My father died when I was 10, wasting away from a sickness no physician could name. My younger sister, the only person who ever truly loved me, drowned in a pond so shallow a child could stand in it." Her voice cracked. "Everyone I love dies, Edward. Everyone. That is why Venner was so eager to send me away. They were not arranging a marriage. They were exporting a curse." Understanding dawned in Edward's expression, followed by something that looked like recognition. "So you see," Eleanor continued, "I am not here because I am brave or noble. I am here because I am poison, and Venner wanted me gone before I killed anyone else. We are both monsters wearing different masks." Edward reached for her then, pulling her against him with desperate intensity. Eleanor could feel his heart racing against her own. "We are not monsters," he said into her hair. "We are people terrified of what we might become." Eleanor pressed her face against his chest, breathing in cedar and rain and something underneath that was purely him. For the first time since her sister died, she felt something like safety. "What do we do?" she whispered. Edward pulled back just enough to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw the same wild hope that was blooming in her own chest. "We survive together, and maybe, if we are very lucky, we prove everyone wrong about what we are." Eleanor nodded, then rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like rain and revelation. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Edward rested his forehead against hers. "I will not let your curse touch you," he promised. "I will stand between you and death itself if I must." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And I will remind you every day that the darkness inside you does not define you, that you are more than what you fear." They stood there in the firelight, two broken people holding each other like lifelines, while outside the storm raged and the ocean threw itself against the cliffs below. Neither of them heard the door open behind them. Neither of them saw the figure slip into the room, moving silent as smoke. It was only when Eleanor felt the cold press of steel against her throat that she realized they were not alone. "Touching?" said a voice from behind her. A woman's voice, cultured and cold. "But I am afraid your happily ever after ends here." Edward froze, his eyes locked on whoever held Eleanor captive. Morgan. The blade pressed harder, and Eleanor felt a trickle of blood slide down her neck. "Hello, brother," the woman said, and her smile was audible in her words. "Did you really think I would let you find happiness while I rot in exile?" Eleanor met Edward's horrified gaze and understood with crystalline clarity that their nightmare was only beginning. The woman holding the knife to Eleanor's throat moved like water, pulling her backward until they stood in the shadows near the door. Edward did not move, but every muscle in his body was coiled tight. Ready to strike in the firelight, Eleanor could finally see her captor's reflection in one of the mirrors. She looked like Edward would have looked if he had been born female. Same sharp features, same storm gray eyes. But where Edward's face held controlled violence, this woman's held chaos barely leashed. "Let her go, Morgan." Edward's voice was deadly calm. "She has nothing to do with this, does she not?" Morgan laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Your bride, your fresh start, your chance to pretend you are not exactly what father said you were." The knife pressed harder, and Eleanor felt more blood slide warm down her neck. "Tell me, brother, does she know what you did to me? Does she know why I was exiled?" Edward's hands clenched into fists. "That was not my doing, was it not?" Morgan's voice turned venomous. "You stood before father and told him I was unstable, that I was dangerous, that I needed to be sent away before I hurt someone. You, Edward, you who had killed more men than I had years of life. You called me the monster." Eleanor kept very still, her mind racing. She could feel Morgan's breath against her ear, could smell wine and something bitter underneath. This woman was not just angry, she was shattered. "I was trying to protect you," Edward said, and for the first time Eleanor heard genuine pain in his voice. "The things you were doing, Morgan, the experiments, the servants who went missing, I did not want to see you executed, so you buried me alive instead." Morgan's laugh turned into something close to a sob. 10 years, Edward. 10 years in that fortress by the sea, with nothing but my thoughts and my rage. And now you dare to find happiness?" Eleanor finally spoke, her voice steady despite the blade at her throat. "What do you want?" Morgan went still. "Smart girl. Direct. I like that." She leaned closer to Eleanor. "What I want is to watch my dear brother suffer the way I have suffered. And the fastest way to break Edward is to take away the one thing he has finally allowed himself to care about. You would kill an innocent woman to hurt me." Edward took a step forward. "That is not justice, Morgan. That is madness." "Then we are both mad." Morgan's voice cracked. "Because you have that same darkness, brother, that same hunger, and you have simply learned to dress it up in noble intentions and silver masks." Eleanor felt Morgan's hand begin to shake. The knife wavered against her skin. This woman did not want to kill. She wanted to be seen, to be understood, to have someone acknowledge her pain. "He told me about the darkness," Eleanor said quietly. Morgan froze. "What?" "Edward. He told me tonight about what he feels, about what he fears he is." Eleanor took a careful breath. "And I told him about my curse, about everyone I loved dying, about being sent away because my kingdom believed I carried death in my shadow." And the knife pulled back slightly. Eleanor could feel Morgan's confusion in the shift of her grip. "We're all three cursed," Eleanor continued. "Or we are all three simply people who were told we were monsters so many times we began to believe it. But killing me will not ease your pain, Morgan. It will only prove everyone who feared you, right?" "You do not understand," Morgan whispered, but her voice had lost its edge. "I understand being exiled from everyone you love. I understand watching people fear you for something you cannot control." Eleanor slowly raised her hand and placed it over Morgan's, over the hand holding the knife. "I understand wanting someone, anyone, to see that you are more than what they say you are." For a long, trembling moment, nothing happened. Then Morgan made a sound between a laugh and a sob, and the knife clattered to the floor. Eleanor spun around to face her. Morgan stood there, arms wrapped around herself, looking suddenly very young and very lost. "He left me there," Morgan said, and tears were streaming down her face. "My own brother left me to rot, and I died in that place. The person I was died, and this is what crawled out." Edward moved forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought exile was better than execution. I did not know they would lock you in darkness. I did not know what it would do to you. You never came to see me. Not once in 10 years. I was forbidden." Edward's voice broke. Father's final order before he died. I was not to see you, not to write to you, not to speak your name. If I had defied him, if I had been branded traitor and killed, who would have eventually secured your release? Morgan looked up at him, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. Release? Edward pulled a folded document from inside his coat. His hand shook as he held it out. The day I turned 25, Father's orders expired. I have spent the last 3 years working through the courts to overturn your exile. This arrived 2 weeks ago. You are pardoned, Morgan. You are free. Morgan stared at the document like it might bite her. Why did you not tell me? I sent riders to the fortress. Edward's voice was thick with emotion. They said you had escaped 6 months ago. I have been searching for you ever since, terrified that you would do something that would void the pardon. That would make it impossible to bring you home. The room fell silent, except for the rain and the crackling fire. Morgan slowly took the document, unfolded it with trembling hands, and read. Her face crumpled. I thought you hated me, she whispered. I thought I was truly alone. Edward crossed the remaining distance and pulled his sister into his arms. Morgan collapsed against him, sobbing like a child, and Eleanor saw tears streaming down Edward's face as well. I never stopped loving you, Edward said into Morgan's hair. I just did not know how to save you from yourself or from Father. I am so sorry, Morgan. I am so sorry. Eleanor stood back, giving them space for their reunion. Her hand pressed against the shallow cut on her neck. She felt the weight of being witness to something raw and sacred, after a long moment. Morgan pulled back and looked at Eleanor, her eyes red and swollen. I could have killed you, but you did not. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. That is what matters. Morgan wiped her face roughly. I do not know how to be anything but angry anymore. I do not know how to be a person again. Then you will learn, Eleanor said simply. We all will. Together. Morgan looked between Eleanor and Edward, something like wonder in her expression. Then she laughed. The sound still broken, but somehow lighter. You found a woman as damaged as we are, brother. I suppose that is fitting. Edward managed a weak smile. We found each other. All 3 of us. Maybe that is enough. They stood there in the firelight. 3 people who had been told they were cursed, who had been shaped by darkness and fear, who had finally found something like understanding, but their moment of peace was shattered by the sound of bells ringing through the castle, not the gentle bells of celebration, the harsh, urgent clanging of alarm. Edward's head snapped up. That is the warning bell. Morgan paled. I was followed. I thought I had lost them in the forest, but I was followed. Eleanor demanded. Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. The people who kept me in that fortress. The ones who did not want me free. They serve someone higher than any king, and they have come to take me back. Edward grabbed his mask from the desk, then pulled 2 swords from a cabinet Eleanor had not noticed. He tossed one to Morgan, who caught it easily. How many? He asked. Enough? Morgan's grip on the sword was steady, despite her tears. Edward, they will kill anyone who stands between us. Edward looked at Eleanor, and in his eyes she saw a desperate calculation. Go to the eastern tower. Lock yourself in. No matter what you hear, do not come out until I come for you. Eleanor's voice was ironed. I am not hiding while you 2 face this alone. Eleanor, you do not know how to fight. Then I will learn quickly. She walked to the cabinet and found a long dagger. It felt heavy and wrong in her hand, but she gripped it anyway. You said we survived together. That means all 3 of us, or none of us. Edward looked like he wanted to argue, but the bells were still ringing, and they could hear shouting now. It's growing closer. Morgan moved to the door, sword raised. She looked back at her brother and his bride, and something fierce and feral lit her eyes. If we are going to do this, we do it right. No more masks. No more hiding what we are. Edward nodded slowly, then set the silver mask on the desk. His bare face was terrible and beautiful in the firelight. No more masks, he agreed. The door burst open. And armed figures in black poured into the room like a flood of shadows. Eleanor raised her dagger, standing between Edward and Morgan. and finally understood what it meant to choose to fight rather than flee. The first attacker lunged forward, and everything became blood and steel and screaming. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes, but to Eleanor, it felt like hours. Blood slicked the floor. Morgan moved like death itself, her sword singing through the air. Edward fought with the precision of a man who had killed many times before, and Eleanor saw now what he meant about the darkness. There was something almost joyful in his movements, something unleashed. Eleanor herself managed to wound one attacker when he came too close, driving her dagger into his shoulder with shaking hands. The man screamed and fell back, and Eleanor stood there staring at the blood on her blade, horror and something else coursing through her veins. When the last attacker fell, the room was carnage. 6 bodies, maybe 7. Eleanor had lost count. Morgan stood against the wall, breathing hard, a gash across her ribs, bleeding through her shirt. Edward was unmarked but splattered with blood that was not his own. That cannot be all of them, Morgan gasped. Edward shook his head. No, this was just the advance guard. They were testing our defenses. Then we need to leave. Eleanor forced herself to think through the shock. This castle is not defensible. Not against a larger force. Ow, where would we go? Morgan slumped down the wall. They will hunt me to the ends of the earth. That is their purpose, their obsession. They believe I am an abomination that must be destroyed. Edward knelt beside his sister, examining her wound. Who are they, Morgan? Truly. You said they serve someone higher than kings. Morgan's laugh was bitter. They call themselves the Purge. A secret order dedicated to eliminating those they deem cursed or corrupted. They have existed for centuries, working in shadows, advising courts, manipulating kingdoms. She looked at Eleanor. Your kingdom's council includes at least 3 of their members. How do you think the prophecy about you was spread so effectively? Eleanor felt ice flood her veins. They orchestrated my exile, and mine. Morgan pressed a hand to her bleeding side. And they would have eventually come for Edward too, if he had ever removed his mask. The Purge cannot tolerate anyone who might upset the natural order. Anyone who might hold power while being what they call tainted. And we fight them, Edward said flatly. Cannot fight shadows. Morgan's eyes were hollow. They are everywhere, nowhere. How do you battle an enemy you cannot name? A new voice cut through the room, refined and familiar. You do not. Eleanor spun around. Standing in the doorway was Lord Ashton, her father's most trusted advisor. The man who had helped arrange her marriage to Edward. He wore the same gentle smile he always did, but now Eleanor saw it for what it was. A mask, more effective than any silver. Lord Ashton, Eleanor's voice was ice. You are one of them. I am their high shepherd. He stepped over the bodies without looking down. And I have been guiding your path since you were born, dear Eleanor. Every tragedy, every loss, every moment that made you believe you were cursed. All carefully orchestrated to bring you to this exact moment. Edward moved in front of Eleanor, sword raised. Stay back. Ashton laughed softly. You misunderstand, Prince Edward. I am not here to kill anyone. I am here to offer a choice. He pulled a small vial from his pocket, the liquid inside glowing faint blue in the firelight. This is called the severance. 1 drop will destroy whatever curse or darkness resides in a person's blood. It will cure Morgan of her instability, remove Edward's violent impulses, end Eleanor's death shadow. You could all be normal, free from the weight you carry. Morgan straightened, hope and suspicion warring on her face. Why would you offer us this? Because the Purge's true purpose is not destruction. It is purification. Ashton's voice took on the cadence of a sermon. We eliminate those who refuse to be cured. But those who choose to be cleansed, who choose to become what they should have been, they are welcomed with open arms. You 3 could leave this place tonight, start new lives, never again fear what you might become. Eleanor stared at the vial. Everything she had lost, everyone who had died could be prevented. She would never again watch someone she loved wither away. She could touch Edward without fearing her curse would take him. She could be normal. What is the cost? Eleanor asked quietly. Ashton's smile widened. The cost is what you are. The darkness, yes, but also the strength it gives you. Morgan's brilliant but dangerous mind would become merely ordinary. Edward's warrior instincts would fade to nothing. Eleanor's strange ability to see death coming, even if she has not yet recognized it in herself, would vanish. You would be safe, normal, unremarkable, exactly like everyone else. Eleanor looked at Edward, then at Morgan. She saw her own conflict mirrored in their eyes. Edward spoke first, his voice rough. And if we refuse, then the purge will never stop hunting you. Ashton's tone remained pleasant, as if discussing the weather. More will come. Dozens, hundreds, if necessary. You may survive tonight, even tomorrow, but eventually you will fall. And when you do, you will be made examples of. They will tell stories about you for generations. The cursed prince, the mad sister, the bride of death. Cautionary tales to frighten children. Morgan laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. So we can be dead, or we can be nothing. What a generous choice. It is the only choice. Ashton held out the vial. I will even sweeten the offer. Take the severance, and I will ensure no retribution comes for you. You will be given land, titles, a chance to build a true life together. 3 days to decide. After that, the offer expires, and the hunt begins in earnest. He set the vial on the desk, next to Edward's discarded mask. 3 days, he repeated, then turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the corridor until silence returned. Eleanor. Edward and Morgan stood frozen, all staring at the glowing vial. We should refuse, Morgan said, but her voice shook. We should not let them win. Is it winning if we end up dead? Edward's jaw was tight. Morgan, you would finally have peace. No more anger, no more darkness, eating you alive. But I would not be me. Morgan touched her temple. Everything I am, even the broken parts, they are mine. If I give them up, who would I become? Some pale ghost of who I was? Eleanor reached for the vial, then stopped. My sister died in my arms. She drowned because she ran to me, and my curse took her the moment she touched me. Her voice cracked. I have lived every day since then, terrified of loving anyone, terrified of being the thing that destroys them. If this could end that, if this could mean I could love Edward and Morgan without fear, how can I refuse? Edward pulled her against him. Your sister died from bad luck, Eleanor. Not from you. There is no curse, is there not? Eleanor looked up at him. Every person I have loved has died. Every single one. My mother, my father, my sister, even my childhood nurse. All of them gone? Either I am truly cursed, or I am the unluckiest woman alive. Either way, I am poison. You are not poison. Edward's grip tightened. You are the only person who has ever looked at me and not flinched. The only person who saw past the mask to what I truly am and stayed anyway. That is not cursed, Eleanor. That is grace. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. But what if I lose you too? What if loving you is what kills you? Then I will die loved, Edward said simply. I would rather have 1 year with you as we truly are than 100 years as pale shadows of ourselves. Morgan wiped her eyes roughly. I hate that you are being romantic while we are covered in blood and facing impossible choices. Despite everything, Eleanor laughed. It came out broken, but real. We have 3 days to decide. Let us use them to figure out who we truly want to be. They spent the rest of that night cleaning the room, binding Morgan's wound, and planning. Edward sent his most trusted servants to investigate the purge's reach, to find out how deep their influence ran. Morgan pored over old texts in the castle library. Searching for any other way to break their so-called curses, Eleanor stood at the window. Watching dawn break over the black ocean, and tried to imagine a life without fear. A life where she could love freely, where Edward could show his face without shame, where Morgan could simply exist without rage. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. On the second day, messengers returned with grave news. The Purge had agents in every kingdom, every court. They had been manipulating world events for centuries. Fighting them would mean fighting an enemy woven into the very fabric of power. On the third morning, Eleanor woke to find Edward already awake. Sitting on the edge of the bed with the glowing vial in his hand. "I know what I want to do," he said quietly. "But I cannot make this choice for you or for Morgan. It has to be all of us or none of us." Eleanor sat up, her heart pounding. "What do you want?" Edward looked at her, and in his gray eyes she saw something she had never seen before. Not fear, not anger, not violence. Just love, clear and absolute. "I want to keep you," he said. "All of you. Every dark corner, every curse, every beautiful, terrible thing that makes you who you are. I want Morgan, wild and brilliant, and yes, sometimes frightening. I want myself, darkness and all, because that darkness is part of the man you chose. I want us real, Eleanor. Not cured, not fixed. Real." Eleanor felt something break open in her chest. "Even if it means running for the rest of our lives?" Even then, Edward set the vial down and took her hands. Better a short life lived truly than a long one spent as someone else's idea of acceptable. Eleanor kissed him, fierce and desperate. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. "Then we refuse. We all refuse." But Morgan's voice from the doorway shattered their moment. "I am sorry." They turned to see her standing there, dressed for travel, a packed bag at her feet. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was resolved. "Morgan, no." Edward started to rise. "I cannot do this." Morgan's voice broke. "I cannot spend my life running, always looking over my shoulder, always one step from death. You two have each other. You have love. But I have nothing except rage and fear, and I am so tired of being afraid." She pulled out an identical vial from her pocket. "Ashton left me my own dose. I am taking it." Eleanor felt her world tilt. "You would leave us. I would set you free." Morgan looked at her brother with devastating love. "The Purge wants me most of all. If I take the severance and surrender myself to them, they will leave you both alone. You can have your life together. You can be happy? Absolutely not." Edward crossed the room in 3 strides. "I will not lose you again, Morgan. We fight this together, or not at all. You do not get to choose for me." Morgan's shout echoed through the castle. "I spent 10 years in darkness because of choices other people made for me. This is my choice, Edward. Finally, my choice." "It is suicide," Edward said desperately. "You think they will just let you go once you are cured? They will use you, control you, make you into a weapon against others like us." Morgan smiled sadly. "Perhaps, but at least I will not be a weapon anymore. At least the anger will stop." She looked at Eleanor. "Keep him alive. Keep him human. That is all I ask." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another way." "There is not." Morgan uncorked the vial. "Tell me I am making the wrong choice. Tell me I should stay and watch you both die because of me. Tell me I should be that selfish." Neither of them could say it. Morgan raised the vial in a toast. "To being free, one way or another." She drank. The effect was immediate. Morgan gasped, the vial falling from her hand to shatter on the floor. She collapsed and Edward caught her before she hit the ground. Her body convulsed once, twice, then went still. When her eyes opened again, they were different. Calmer, emptier. Morgan. Edward's voice was barely a whisper. She sat up slowly, looking around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. When her gaze landed on Edward, there was recognition, but not the fierce love from before. Just mild warmth. "I feel strange," she said, and even her voice was different. Softer, less sharp. Lighter. "Is this what normal feels like?" Edward pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor saw his shoulders shake with silent sobs. Morgan patted his back awkwardly, like she was not quite sure what the gesture meant anymore. "It is all right," Morgan said. "I am still here." But they both knew she was not. Not really. The brilliant, dangerous, wild woman who had held a knife to Eleanor's throat and then wept in her brother's arms was gone. In her place was someone gentler, safer. utterly ordinary and completely empty. Eleanor watched Edward hold his sister and understood with terrible clarity what the severance truly took. Not just the darkness, not just the curse, but the fire, the passion, everything that made a person blaze with life. Morgan stood, brushing off her clothes. I should go. Lord Ashton said there is a carriage waiting to take me to a new estate. He has arranged everything. She smiled at them, pleasant and vacant. You two should take the severance as well. It truly is not bad. I do not understand why I was so afraid before. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. Edward grabbed her arm. Morgan, please wait, think about this. She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face, confused. Why? Everything is fine now. Better than fine. I feel peaceful for the first time in my life. She pulled away gently. Goodbye, Edward. Goodbye, Eleanor. I hope you find your peace too. And then she was gone, walking away with steady steps. No longer the storm that had crashed into their lives, but a gentle breeze that barely stirred the air. Edward stood frozen in the doorway, watching her disappear down the corridor. When he finally turned back to Eleanor, his face was devastated. She chose to die, he whispered. She chose to kill who she was, rather than fight. Eleanor went to him, wrapping her arms around him as tightly as she could. She chose peace. Even if we do not understand it, even if it breaks our hearts, it was her choice. I cannot lose you too. Edward's voice was raw. I cannot watch you become that. Empty? Safe? Nothing. You will not. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. We refuse. Both of us. We refuse their cure, their peace, their vision of who we should be. And we fight, Edward. We fight until we cannot fight anymore. Edward searched her eyes. They will come for us. Tonight, tomorrow, every day for the rest of our lives, however long or short that may be, then we make every day count. Eleanor took the remaining vial from the desk and walked to the window. She looked at the glowing liquid one last time, the promise of normalcy and safety it represented. Then she threw it out the window. It tumbled down toward the rocks and sea far below, the blue light fading as it fell. When she turned back, Edward was watching her with something like awe.
Ow!
No more running, Eleanor said. No more hiding. No more letting other people tell us what we are or what we should be. We stand and we fight, and if we fall together. Edward crossed to her and kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. When they broke apart, he pressed something into her hand. It was his silver mask, the one he had worn for so long. I do not need this anymore, he said. I have you to remind me that the darkness does not define me, that I am more than what I fear. Eleanor set the mask beside the window. A monument to a lie neither of them would tell anymore. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. They could see dust rising from the road, riders approaching at speed. The purge was coming. Edward and Eleanor stood at the window, hand in hand, and watched their enemies approach. Whatever happens, Edward said quietly, thank you for seeing me. The real me. Not the mask, not the prince, not the monster. Just me. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Thank you for seeing me too. Not the curse, not the bride, not the death shadow. Just Eleanor. The riders grew closer. They could hear the thunder of hooves now, could see the glint of weapons in the fading light. Edward pulled Eleanor back from the window and kissed her one last time. Gentle and fierce and full of every word they would never get to say. Then he picked up his sword, and Eleanor grabbed her dagger, and together they walked down the stairs to face whatever came next. Behind them, the silver mask sat on the windowsill, catching the last light of the dying sun. A mask no longer needed, a lie no longer told. Freedom. Finally, at whatever cost, it demanded. The courtyard was filled with armed riders, at least 50 of them. All wearing the black and silver of the purge, Lord Ashton sat astride a white horse at their center, his gentle smile still in place. Edward and Eleanor stood at the castle entrance, alone, weaponless now. They had left the swords upstairs. If this was to be their end, they would face it as themselves, not as warriors. You threw away the severance, Ashton called out, his voice carrying across the space. That was unwise, Princess. It was honest, Eleanor called back. Something you would not understand. Ashton dismounted gracefully. I had hoped Morgan's transformation would inspire you, show you the peace that awaits. But I see her sacrifice was wasted on you both. Sacrifice. Edward's voice was ice. You murdered her. Not her body, but everything that made her who she was. That is not salvation. That is erasure. It is correction. Ashton walked closer, and his guards moved with him, a wall of steel and shadow. The world has an order, Prince Edward. The strong rule, the weak serve, and those who are neither, those who are other, they are removed. It is the only way to maintain stability. Eleanor stepped forward. And who decides what is other? Who gave you that right? Centuries of tradition? Generations of careful stewardship? Ashton stopped 10 feet away. We have prevented countless disasters by eliminating those who would disrupt the natural order. You think your darkness is special, Prince? You think your curse is unique, Princess? We have ended thousands like you. You are not martyrs. You are simply the next in a very long line. Edward took Eleanor's hand. Then you will have to end us together. Because we refuse your cure, and we refuse to become what you want us to be. For the first time, Ashton's smile faltered. You would choose death over peace? We choose truth over lies. Eleanor's voice rang out clear. We choose love over fear. We choose to be ourselves, darkness and all, rather than pale imitations wearing someone else's skin. Ashton studied them for a long moment. Then he sighed, pulling a sword from his belt. So be it. I had hoped to save you, but elimination is acceptable as well. He raised the blade and his guards began to advance. Eleanor closed her eyes, preparing for the end. At least she would die with Edward. At least she would die as herself. But the killing blow never came. Instead, she heard a strange sound, a whistling like wind through leaves. Then shouting. The clash of steel on steel. Eleanor opened her eyes to chaos. Figures in forest. Green were pouring into the courtyard from every direction, attacking the purge's guards with coordinated precision. They moved like dancers, like shadows. Like they had been training for this exact moment their entire lives. At their head was a woman Eleanor had never seen before. Tall and fierce, with silver hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wielded 2 curved blades, and they sang through the air like instruments of justice. Stand down, Ashton. The woman roared. Your reign of terror ends tonight. Ashton's face contorted with rage. The outcasts. You dare interfere? We dare. The silver-haired woman fought her way to Edward and Eleanor, her guards forming a protective circle around them. We have been hunting your kind for decades, watching you poison kingdoms with fear and lies. Tonight, we end you. The battle raged around them, but the woman kept her eyes on Eleanor and Edward. I am Vera, leader of the outcasts. We are all those the purge has tried to eliminate, those who survived their purification, those who refused to be erased. We have come for you because we heard the story of a prince who removed his mask and a princess who refused to hide. You were marked for elimination? My entire family was... Because we could see the future in dreams, and the purge feared what we might reveal. Vera's smile was sharp. They killed my parents and siblings. I alone survived, and I have spent my life building an army of the damned to fight back.
Eleanor
Felt hope kindle in her chest. There are more like us. Hundreds. Scattered across kingdoms, hiding in shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to stand in the light. Vera blocked a strike from a purge guard, then drove her blade through his chest. You did that. You stood at that altar and told the world that curses are not sins, that darkness is not evil, that being different is not a crime. Word spread faster than wildfire, and we came running. The battle was turning. The purge's guards were falling, overwhelmed by the sheer number and ferocity of the outcasts. Ashton himself was backed against his horse. blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder. Vera approached him slowly, her blades dripping red. "Your reign of fear is finished, High Shepherd. The purge will be hunted now. You will be the ones living in shadows, always looking over your shoulders, always one step from death." Ashton's laugh was bitter. "You think you have one? The purge is eternal. We are woven into every court, every council. Kill me. Kill 100 of us, and 1,000 more will rise. Then we will fight 1,000 more." Edward stepped forward, standing beside Vera. "Every person you have hunted, every life you have tried to erase, will stand with us. You made us into an army, Ashton. You created the very thing you feared most." Ashton looked at Edward, then at Eleanor, and something like understanding flickered in his eyes. "You will never know peace," no, Eleanor said quietly, "but we will know freedom. And that is worth any price." Vera raised her blade, but Edward stopped her. "Wait." He approached Ashton, unarmed, unafraid. "I could kill you. Part of me wants to. But that would make me what you always claimed I was, a monster who kills without mercy." He stepped back. "Instead, I offer you what you never offered any of us. A choice. Take your own severance. Cure yourself of the hatred and fear that drives you. Become someone new. Or face trial for your crimes. Choose." Ashton stared at him, disbelief written across his face. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. It started as a chuckle and built into something manic and broken. "You are better than me," he said finally. "All of you. You have what we could never have. Strength to be kind in the face of cruelty. The courage to choose love over vengeance." Looked around at the fallen guards, at the outcasts standing victorious. "Perhaps that is the true curse. Not what you are, but what we made you suffer for being it." He pulled out a vial from his pocket, the same glowing blue as the severance Eleanor had thrown away. "I wonder what I will become without my certainty." "Without my purpose, you will become whoever you choose to be," Eleanor said. "And that is the gift we all have, if we are brave enough to claim it." Ashton looked at the vial for a long moment. Then he uncorked it and drank. The transformation was immediate and terrible. He collapsed, convulsing, and when he opened his eyes again, they were empty of everything that had driven him. No fanaticism, no purpose, no identity at all. "What have I done?" he whispered, looking at his hands like they belonged to a stranger. "What have I done?" Vera knelt beside him. "You have been given a chance to start over. Do not waste it." She gestured to two of her people, who helped Ashton to his feet and led him away. He went quietly, like a child being taken to bed. All his certainty and danger bled away. As dawn broke over Shadowkeep, the outcasts moved through the courtyard, tending to wounded and gathering the fallen. There would be more battles, Eleanor knew, more fights against the remnants of the purge, more struggles to build a world where people could be themselves without fear. But for now, there was victory, imperfect, bloody, hard-won victory. Vera approached Edward and Eleanor as they stood together, watching the sunrise. "What will you do now?"
Edward
looked at Eleanor, and she saw everything they had survived reflected in his eyes. "We will build something new, a place where those the world calls cursed can find refuge, where people can choose who they become rather than being told who they must be. A sanctuary," Eleanor added, "for everyone the purge has hunted. Everyone who has been told they are too much, or not enough, or simply wrong." Vera smiled, and it transformed her fierce face into something beautiful. "Then you will need help. The outcasts are yours to command, if you will have us." "Not command," Edward said. "Lead with. This is not about replacing one order with another. It is about building something where no one person holds all the power." They clasped hands, the three of them, and Eleanor felt the weight of possibilities settle over her like a mantle in the months that followed. Shadowkeep was transformed. The dark castle on the cliff became a beacon for all those who had been cast out, hunted, feared. They came in trickles at first, then in waves. People with gifts they had been forced to hide, with darkness they had been told made them monsters, with differences that had marked them for death. Edward ruled without his mask, his face bare to the world, and slowly learned that the darkness inside him could be channeled into protection rather than destruction. He became known not as the Masked Prince, but as the Shield King, the man who had chosen vulnerability over hiding. Eleanor discovered that her so-called curse was actually a gift. She could sense when death approached, and she used that knowledge to save lives rather than cause loss. The people who came to Shadowkeep called her the Death Bride, but they said it with reverence, not fear. And Morgan, empty and changed, eventually found her way back to them. The severance had taken her fire, but it had also given her something she had never had before: peace. She worked in the Sanctuary's library, cataloging stories of all those the Purge had tried to erase, ensuring their memories would never be forgotten. She was not who she had been, but she was not nothing either. She had simply become someone different. And in time, she learned to be content with that. 1 year after their wedding, Edward and Eleanor stood on the castle ramparts looking out over land that had become home not just to them, but to hundreds of others. "Do you ever regret it?" Edward asked quietly. "Throwing away the severance? Choosing this life over an easy one?" Eleanor took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Every easy day," she said honestly, "when I am tired or scared or the purges, remnants attack again, I think about what it would be like to be normal, to be safe." "But," Edward prompted, "but then I remember that being normal would mean not being me. I have fought too hard to become who I am to give that up now." She looked up at him. "You're not curses, Edward. You're not monsters or mistakes or things that need to be fixed. We are simply people who have survived impossible things and chosen to keep surviving. That is not darkness. That is the most human thing there is." Edward pulled her close, and they stood together as the sun set over their sanctuary, over their impossible, imperfect, beautiful kingdom of outcasts and refugees and people who had finally found a place to belong. Behind them in the courtyard, laughter rang out as children played without fear of judgment. Someone was singing an old song in a language the Purge had tried to erase. Life continued, messy and complicated and real. And on the windowsill of the room where it had all begun, the silver masks sat gathering dust, a relic of a time when hiding seemed like the only way to survive. Now they knew better. Now they knew that the only way to truly live was to stand in the light, shadows and all, and dare the world to look away. Most days, the world looked, and what it saw was not monsters. What it saw was hope. The end.